My name is Lillian. I am 28 years old. I live in Seattle. I work as a classical pianist, performing in concert halls that once felt like forbidden territory to me. People who see me on stage today often think my life is elegant and complete. They do not know that I am standing on the remains of a love I personally destroyed. 5 years ago, there was a boy who shone like sunlight in our high school halls. His name was Daniel Wright. Teachers adored him. Students followed him. Cameras loved him even before fame found him. And yet, for reasons I still cannot fully explain, he chose me. He loved me with a devotion so intense that it lifted me above the ground and placed me somewhere dangerously high. I let myself believe that kind of love could protect us from everything. When I left him, I did not just end a relationship. I broke his pride, shattered his faith, and pushed him to the edge of survival. I watched from a distance, as the world blamed me, and I accepted that role without protest. To everyone else, I was the girl who betrayed the perfect boy once he became successful. To Daniel, I was the wound that never healed. I am not telling this story to ask for sympathy. I am telling it because silence has a cost, and I paid mine for 5 long years. There are nights when my fingers hover above piano keys and tremble, not from fear of failure, but from memory. There are mornings when applause feels heavier than judgment ever did. I learned that surviving does not mean escaping consequences. Sometimes it means carrying them openly. What no one knew then was that my departure was not born from indifference or ambition. It was born from knowledge I was never meant to carry, knowledge that could ruin a family, dismantle a public image, and erase the man I loved from the life he was building. I made a choice that night, and I chose cruelty over truth, because truth would have destroyed us all. People often ask whether I regret leaving Daniel the way I did. They expect a simple answer. Regret is not simple. Regret is waking up every day knowing that the person you love most believes you are their worst mistake. Regret is becoming the villain so someone else can keep breathing. If telling the truth means destroying the person you love, would you still speak? Because I stayed silent. I walked away. And this is the price I paid. This story is not about redemption or reunion. It is about the quiet damage love can cause when power and fear collide. It is about what happens when a young woman decides she must disappear so a man can survive. Before you judge me, listen carefully. Because every silence has a reason, and every choice leaves scars. That is my truth. Nothing more, nothing less. When I think back to the beginning, I always remember the sound before I remember the people, the soft echo of piano keys in an empty auditorium, the faint smell of dust and old wood, the way my fingers felt lighter than my own body, as if they did not belong to me but to something greater, something that had chosen me long before I understood what choice meant. Back then, music was not a dream. It was a certainty. I had been playing the piano since I was 5. By the time I entered high school, teachers no longer asked whether I wanted to pursue music. They spoke as if my future had already been signed, sealed, and approved by fate itself. Scholarships, conservatories, international competitions. My life unfolded in front of me like a carefully written score. Then, Daniel Wright transferred into my class. Everyone noticed him immediately. He did not have to raise his voice or prove anything. He simply existed, and people gravitated toward him. Teachers softened when he spoke. Students leaned closer when he laughed. He was the kind of boy who made hallways brighter just by walking through them. I noticed him too, of course. But I did not believe someone like him would ever look at someone like me. I was quiet. I spent my lunch breaks in practice rooms or libraries. I kept my head down, my grades high, my world small and controlled. Music demanded discipline, and I had learned early that distractions were dangerous. Daniel did not believe in that rule. The first time he spoke to me, he tapped the back of my chair with the eraser of his pencil and asked if I could lend him one. His voice was casual, almost lazy, as if talking to me was the most natural thing in the world. When I handed it to him, our fingers brushed, and I remember thinking how ridiculous it was that such a small contact could unsettle me so deeply. From that day on, he found reasons to sit near me, to walk with me, to wait for me after class. He listened when I talked about music, even when I spoke too fast, even when I doubted myself mid-sentence. He never mocked my seriousness. He never told me to relax. He treated my world as if it mattered. I fell in love slowly, then all at once. Daniel loved loudly. He was not subtle. He was not cautious. When he cared, he made sure the entire world knew it. He studied harder just to sit beside me in ranking lists. He volunteered for school events he hated just to watch me from the audience while I played. Once, during a lunch break, he draped his jacket over my shoulders because he thought the room was too cold for me, even though he was the one shivering afterward. I had never been loved like that. Being with him felt like standing in sunlight after years of practicing alone in dim rooms. I began to believe that maybe I did not have to choose between love and ambition. Maybe I could have both. The semester before my most important audition, everything still felt possible. Then came the night that ended everything. It was late. Too late. I remember thinking I should not have been out, but I was young, and for once I had allowed myself a small rebellion. I was crossing the street, humming a piece I had been practicing for weeks, already planning how I would adjust my phrasing the next morning. I never saw the car coming. There was no dramatic slow motion, no warning, just light, sound, and then pain so sharp it erased thought itself. My body hit the ground, and the world fractured into pieces I could not put back together. I remember screaming, not from fear, but from a sudden understanding that something was terribly wrong. My left hand would not move. At the hospital, time lost its meaning. Doctors spoke in careful voices. My mother sat beside the bed, her face pale, her hands trembling as she held mine. When the doctor finally said the words I had been dreading, they landed heavier than any physical injury. Severe nerve damage, long-term impairment, uncertain recovery. I did not cry at first. I stared at my hand, willing it to obey me, to prove them wrong. When I tried to grip my fingers together and felt them shake uncontrollably, something inside me broke in silence. Daniel arrived breathless, eyes red, guilt written across his face, as if the accident were his fault. He held me carefully, as though I were made of glass, and whispered over and over that everything would be fine, that we would fix this, that I would play again. I wanted to believe him, but reality does not bend to love. The audition came and went. I forced myself onto the stage, ignoring the pain, ignoring the tremor, ignoring the whispers in the audience when my performance faltered. When the examiner stopped me halfway through and called for the next candidate, I felt the final thread of my future snap. After that, the rumors began. People said I had exaggerated my talent, that I had lied about my abilities, that I had failed and could not accept it. They said I quit because I was afraid of being exposed. I did not correct them. Explaining would have required vulnerability, and vulnerability felt like humiliation. Daniel defended me fiercely. He confronted classmates. He slammed desks. He shouted words I had never heard him use before. He stood between me and the world with a loyalty that made my chest ache. But even loyalty has limits. What I did not know then was that the accident was not random, that the silence surrounding it was deliberate, that somewhere above us, beyond our reach, decisions were being made that would shape the rest of my life. All I knew was that my future had collapsed, and the person I loved was the only thing holding me upright. And even that, I would soon be forced to destroy. Pain has a strange way of changing time. After the accident, days moved too slowly, while decisions arrived too fast. My body was still learning how to exist with a left hand that betrayed me, but the world around me did not pause out of courtesy. Applications had deadlines. Schools demanded answers. Life expected me to adapt quietly. I learned very quickly how much sympathy costs. Doctors were kind, but kindness does not lower hospital bills. Rehabilitation sessions piled up like silent threats. My mother never complained, but I saw the way her shoulders sank when she thought I was asleep. She stopped buying new clothes. She skipped meals. She pretended exhaustion was nothing more than age. At night, I lay awake listening to the hum of the refrigerator, counting money in my head the way other people counted sheep. Daniel tried to be everything at once. He showed up every day after school, then every night after rehearsals once his schedule grew busier. He carried my books even when I told him not to. He spoke about the future as if it was still intact, as if determination alone could mend damaged nerves. When I cried, he held me. When I did not cry, he worried more. What I did not tell him was that hope had begun to feel cruel. The first time I realized something was wrong beyond my injury came quietly. It was a phone call. A short one. Polite. Professional. Someone claiming to represent the driver involved in my accident. They asked questions they already seemed to know the answers to. Then they ended the call with a sentence that chilled me. This matter will be handled appropriately. Handle. Not resolved. Not investigated. Handle. Soon after, my mother received a visit. I was in my room when I heard voices in the living area. Low. Controlled. The kind of voices people use when they are accustomed to power. When I stepped out, I saw a woman sitting across from my mother, perfectly dressed, perfectly composed. She smiled at me as if we were meeting under pleasant circumstances. She introduced herself as a legal representative. She spoke about compensation, about inconvenience, about generosity. She slid a folder across the table. Inside were numbers large enough to make my mother's breath catch, enough to cover medical bills, enough to secure a modest future, enough to make questions disappear. There was one condition: silence. No police reports, no media, no personal disclosures, no explanations to anyone. The accident would become an unfortunate, unresolved event. The driver would remain unnamed. Responsibility would dissolve into nothing. I asked one question, just one. Who was driving? The woman's smile did not change, but her eyes hardened slightly. That information is unnecessary. I understood then. This was not about justice. It was about containment. Later that night, when my mother finally broke down, her sobs were quiet and desperate. She asked me what we were supposed to do. She asked how we were supposed to survive. She asked whether pride was worth starvation. I had no answer that could save us both. It was not until weeks later that I learned the truth. I saw her on television. Evelyn Wright, a celebrated artist, a public figure praised for grace and integrity. Daniel's mother, the woman who had smiled at me in my living room, was not just a lawyer. She was a gatekeeper, and the family she protected was the family of the boy I loved. The realization hit me with a force far greater than the accident ever had. If I spoke, everything would burn. Daniel's career, already taking off, would collapse before it truly began. His mother's reputation would shatter. His life would be dragged into a scandal he never chose. And my own family would be crushed by retaliation I did not yet fully understand, but instinctively feared. I tried to imagine telling him. I pictured his face when I said his mother's name. I imagined denial, anger, confusion. I imagined him standing between me and her, torn apart by loyalty and love. I imagined him choosing her. I could not survive that. So I chose silence. Accepting the money felt like swallowing poison slowly. Every transfer into our account felt heavier than the last. I told myself it was for my mother. I told myself survival was not shameful. I told myself I was strong enough to live with this. What I did not anticipate was how silence would rot everything it touched. Daniel noticed the change before anyone else. I became distant, guarded. My words shortened. My smiles faded. I flinched when he touched my left hand. I avoided conversations about the future. The more he tried to pull me closer, the more trapped I felt. Love became unbearable. The night I decided to end it, I rehearsed my cruelty like a performance. I needed him to hate me. That was the only way he would stop digging. That was the only way he would survive without questioning the past. I contacted Lucas Wright first. Daniel's half-brother had always existed on the margins of the family, ignored, resented, useful only when convenient. He understood bitterness. When I told him I needed help, he did not ask why. He agreed to play a role. The confrontation was ugly by design. I made sure Daniel walked in at the wrong moment. I made sure the scene was undeniable. When he asked for an explanation, I gave him words sharp enough to wound permanently. I told him he was a replacement, that my feelings had never been real, that I had been bored. Each sentence felt like tearing pieces of myself away. When his hand shook and his eyes reddened, I nearly broke. When he asked me whether I was lying, my throat closed, but I forced myself to meet his gaze and say, no. That was the moment something inside him collapsed. Later, I heard he almost did not survive that night. I left town shortly after. I cut off contact. I erased myself. The world believed what it saw. Daniel became a rising star, carrying a quiet, unhealed wound. I became the woman who destroyed him without remorse. And the truth settled deep inside me, heavy and unmoving. Silence had saved him, but it had taken everything else. 5 years later, the world had learned how to pronounce Daniel Wright's name. Billboards, interviews, applause that sounded endless. He had become everything people once predicted, polished by fame, protected by silence. When I saw his face again for the first time, it was on a screen in a cafe near the rehearsal hall. The barista turned the volume up. Someone whispered that he was engaged. Someone else laughed. I finished my coffee and walked out without looking back. I told myself I was past this. I had rebuilt my life inch by inch. My left hand no longer shook the way it once had. I had relearned pain the way musicians relearn forgotten pieces, slowly, stubbornly, refusing to accept limitations. New York did not care about my past, and that anonymity had saved me. I was preparing for my first public recital since my return when fate decided to stop pretending we could coexist separately. The hospital smelled exactly the same as it always had. Disinfectant, cold air, quiet urgency. I was there for a routine follow-up. Nothing dramatic, nothing worth mentioning. The nurse greeted me by name, her smile warm with familiarity built over years of visits. She asked about my hand. She asked about my schedule. She asked how my mother was doing. Then she looked past me and hesitated. "Is he your friend?" she asked. I turned. Daniel stood near the corridor entrance, cap pulled low, mask covering half his face, posture rigid in a way that felt painfully familiar. He was taller than I remembered, broader, but the tension in his shoulders was the same. When our eyes met, time failed again. Neither of us spoke. The nurse broke the silence without realizing what she was stepping into. She spoke kindly, casually, the way people do when they assume shared knowledge. She mentioned the accident, the nerve damage, the years of rehabilitation. She mentioned the doctors who once said I would never play again. I watched Daniel's world collapse in real time. His breathing changed. His hands clenched. His eyes searched my face as if begging me to contradict her, to laugh and say it was all a misunderstanding. I did not. When we were finally alone, the questions poured out of him in fragments. Why did you never tell me? How bad was it? How long did you suffer? Each word landed like a delayed echo from a past I had sealed shut. I did not think it mattered anymore, I said. That was not the answer he wanted. He followed me outside. He asked about my life, about the recital, about whether I was happy. He asked whether I had ever loved him at all. When I did not answer, his expression hardened into something defensive and desperate. He told me about Grace Miller, about the rumors, about the lies he had never bothered to correct because truth had stopped feeling important after I left. He said my name like it still belonged to him. I told him to stop. He did not. It was Lucas who finally broke what remained of the illusion. He found us after the recital rehearsal, leaning against a brick wall across from the hall, eyes sharp with intent. He did not bother with pleasantries. He never had. You deserve the truth, he said, looking directly at Daniel. I tried to stop him. I reached for his arm. He shook me off gently but firmly. She already paid the price for your family, he continued. You should at least know why. Daniel turned pale. The words spilled out then, uncontrolled and irreversible. The accident, the cover-up, the money, the silence bought at the cost of a young woman's future. Lucas spoke without emotion, as if reciting facts long stripped of shock. Daniel did not interrupt. He did not argue. He simply listened, his face losing color with every sentence. That night, he went home. I did not follow, but I knew where he was going. Later, Lucas told me what happened. Daniel confronted his mother in the living room they had shared his entire life. He asked calmly at first. He asked whether she remembered a girl named Lillian. He asked whether she remembered a night 5 years ago. He asked whether she had been driving. She denied it until she could not. When she finally admitted the truth, she framed it as protection. Protection of him. Protection of everything she had sacrificed to build his future. She spoke of fear. of consequences, of how easily everything could have been destroyed. Daniel did not shout. He sank to the floor. Luca said he looked smaller than he ever had, hands pressed against his temples as if trying to physically hold his reality together. He asked her why she had never told him. He asked her how she could live with it. He asked her whether she understood what she had taken. She told him she would do it again. That was when something in him broke beyond repair. The next morning, the news exploded. Daniel Wright publicly acknowledged the accident. He named his mother. He withdrew from every contract, every appearance, every obligation. He stood before cameras and said he would step away from the industry until responsibility was fully addressed. He said his success had been built on silence, and he could no longer carry it. People called him ungrateful, disloyal, weak. They were wrong. Walking away from privilege costs more than earning it ever did. He tried to find me after that. He waited outside my building. He called numbers he knew I no longer used. He left messages that went unanswered. I did not owe him forgiveness, and I did not owe him presents. But on the night before my flight, I agreed to see him once. We met at our old school, just before sunset. The walls still bore carved names and promises made by children who believed love was eternal. Daniel traced one inscription with his fingers and smiled faintly. "I never stopped loving you," he said. "I know," I replied. That was the tragedy of it. When I told him I forgave him, he looked at me as if forgiveness were a lifeline. When I told him we could never go back, he finally understood. We stood there as the sky darkened, watching an airplane cut across the horizon. "I hope you live well," he said. "So do I answered. And, for the first time, that hope felt honest. The morning Daniel held the press conference, I did not watch it live. I was on a train headed out of the city, my forehead resting against the cold glass as the skyline slowly unraveled behind me. Notifications flooded my phone anyway. His name, his face. Words like confession, withdrawal, accountability. Strangers arguing over whether he was brave or foolish. Whether he deserved praise or punishment. I muted everything. For 5 years, my life had been shaped by a single truth I was never allowed to speak. I had learned that justice does not always arrive in courtrooms or headlines. Sometimes it arrives quietly, when someone finally chooses to stop running. Later that evening, I watched a recording of his statement. Daniel stood alone at the podium. No smile, no charm, no practiced ease. He spoke slowly, carefully, as if each word carried weight he had only just begun to understand. He did not ask for forgiveness. He did not defend his mother. He did not justify himself. He said he was stepping away because success meant nothing if it was built on silence that destroyed someone else's life. When he bowed at the end, it was not a performance. It was an apology the world could see, even if it was never meant to reach me. I did not sue. People asked why. Lawyers reached out. Journalists hinted at justice, at closure, at a final victory. They did not understand that I had already paid for this story with years I would never get back. I did not need more compensation. I did not need revenge, dressed up as righteousness. I needed a future. 3 months later, I boarded a plane with one suitcase and a folder of acceptance letters. When the aircraft lifted off, I felt something loosen inside my chest, something that had been tight for so long I had mistaken it for part of me. I watched the city shrink until it became nothing more than light and shadow. This time, I was not running. My new life did not arrive dramatically. There were no grand moments, no cinematic revelations. There were practice rooms that smelled like old carpet and determination. There were nights when my hand ached, and mornings when it did not. There were days when music felt effortless again, and days when it reminded me how fragile everything still was. But I was free. Occasionally, I heard news about Daniel. He kept his distance from the spotlight. He honored his words. He disappeared in the way only someone truly committed to consequence can. I hoped he found peace, even if that peace no longer included me. We never spoke again. I do not tell this story to frame myself as strong or noble. I tell it because life is not a simple exchange of guilt and innocence. Sometimes, love demands silence. Sometimes, silence demands sacrifice. And sometimes, letting go is the only way to survive without becoming bitter. If you ask me now whether I would make the same choices again, I cannot give you a clean answer. I only know that I am still here. I am still playing. I am still moving forward. And that is enough. I forgave him not so we could return to what we were, but so neither of us would remain trapped there. The past does not disappear when you face it. It simply loses its power to decide who you become. This is not a story about reunion. It is a story about release.